Let's start with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for your word which became flesh and made his dwelling among us. Heavenly Father, I pray that as we look into the written word you've left for us today, that you'd open up our hearts and our minds to hear, to understand what you would say to us today, and help us to apply it rightly in our lives. Lord, I pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. So today we come to this really interesting story about wise men from the East who came to find Jesus. They were searching for Christ. And it brings up a really difficult but important question for us to ask. And that is, how will people find out about Jesus if they're from a place or living in a place where there's no one to tell them? Well, when I was living in Abu Dhabi, when I was serving in a church there, I was one of the junior members of the pastoral staff at that time. And I had a friend who was one of the senior members of the staff. He was one of the pastors of the church there. And he would always say that if someone was sincerely searching for God, that God would reveal himself to them in some way. And that's biblical. Jesus says, "Seek and you will find, knock and the door will be open to you." And he had a really interesting story about this as well. He said that while he was serving as a missionary previously to coming to Abu Dhabi, he was serving in another country, and it was a country that is mostly comprised of Muslims. While he was serving there, one day a man walked up to him and said, "What is Mark 1:15? What is Mark 1:15? I've been having dream night after night after night. And inside the dream, I hear a voice that says, Mark 1:15, ask a Christian. Mark 1:15, ask a Christian." What does Mark 1:15 say? Jesus began proclaiming the good news, saying, "Repent and believe the gospel." And so it opened up an opportunity for my friend to tell this man about Christ. So if people are searching for Jesus, they're going to find him, because God is going to make the way to reveal himself to them. So today we're coming to this last Sunday in our Advent series, where we've been focusing on the events that surrounded the birth of Christ, and we've been particularly focusing on the different ways that people responded to him and the news of him. In the last few weeks, we've seen Mary and Joseph and Elizabeth and shepherds and angels all coming to Christ and responding to him with faith and joy and with praise. And last week, in our previous sermon, we had these two prophets. And Simeon, one of the prophets, prophesied that the thoughts from many hearts would be revealed by Jesus. And in Matthew chapter 2, 1 through 23, where we're on today, we find that Jesus started revealing people's true hearts towards God even as a toddler. Surprisingly, this would first be fulfilled when a group of basically foreign magicians came searching for Jesus. They came searching for him, while at the same time, the king of Jerusalem would find out and search for him too, but not for the same reason. He would search not to worship Jesus, but to kill him. Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 and 2. Please excuse my voice today. I'm still recovering from a cold. It says, "Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, 'Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him.'" Now these first two verses raise a lot of questions. Who were these wise men? And what are wise men to begin with? Where in the east did they come from? How did they know about the birth of Jesus? How did a star tell them anything about a king? And why would they want to worship a Jewish king? I think that these questions they're quite difficult to answer, but if we can get a little bit closer to what the answers might be, I think it's important for understanding the rest of the story. So we're going to get into just these two verses here for a few minutes here. So the Greek text calls them magoi, which is the plural of magus. And apart from being where we get the English word magic from, this word was actually an old Persian word, an ancient Persian word. And it was imported into Greek. And the word basically was applied to the priestly caste in Persian society. So these wise men of Persia were well known in that part of the world as astrologers and collectors of knowledge. So that's partly. I think that seems to describe the characters we've met in the text so far. They're astrologers. They're looking at stars and trying to figure out what omens the stars are giving them to interpret. And they're collecting knowledge, so somehow they know about the birth of this king of the Jews. So at that time in history, Persia had become the Parthian Empire and had a sort of uneasy peace with Rome. Some 500 years earlier, though, there was a really important event in the life of the Persian kingdoms, well, the Babylonian kingdom before the Persian kingdom, that might make some sense of how they knew about Jesus or how they knew about the birth of the Christ at this time. See, back then, there was an exiled son of Israelite nobility named Daniel who was made chief of the wise men of Babylon. So you kind of see how God works. He's got things all under control. He's doing things in the past that are going to affect the future. And he became the chief of the wise men of Babylon under King Nebuchadnezzar. And he held that position even after Cyrus of Persia came and conquered Babylon. And being such an important person among the wise men of Persia, it would make sense that Daniel's writings would have been familiar to them. So they would have had the book of Daniel, just like, we studied the book of Daniel about actually just exactly 1 year ago, didn't we? And we learned that in the book of Daniel there are a whole lot of forward-looking prophecies of a Messiah who is going to come. And so they would have been familiar with this. Particularly, let's have a look at Daniel chapter 7, verses 13 and 14. He says, I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven there came one like a son of man. And he came to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. So that's just one of many messianic prophecies that were contained in the book of Daniel. So if we take this together with some of the others in Daniel, it would make sense that some of the wise men, or the magi as we call them, of Persia would be looking forward to a great king who would be born in Judea. A king that, according to Daniel, would inaugurate a global and everlasting kingdom. Now, I think that's the easiest part to explain about these guys. The more difficult thing to explain is that they used astrology to determine the time and even the place of this king's birth. That actually presents a bit of a problem. You see, astrology is the practice of using signs in the sky to find out about or to predict human events. And it's problematic for a couple of reasons. First of all, there's no place in Scripture that says that the Messiah will be accompanied by the appearance of a special star. You can't find that in the Old Testament. But on top of that, what we do find in Scripture is a direct prohibition against practicing divination of any kind. Now, divination is basically it's the practice of, using various things as ways of finding out what's going to happen in the future. In some places they do divination with tea leaves, right? You pour the water out of a cup and you look and you see the pattern of the leaves in the bottom of the cup and you say, aha, that's going to tell me about the future. Well, that makes just about as much sense as looking up at the sky, at the stars, and saying, aha, that's going to tell me about the future. And not only that, but Deuteronomy chapter 18, verses 10 to 12. This is what God said to his people. He said, there shall not be found among you anyone who burns his son or daughter as an offering, anyone who practices divination, or tells fortunes, or interprets omens, or a sorcerer, or a charmer, or a medium, or a wizard, or a necromancer. For whoever does these things is an abomination to the Lord. And because of these abominations, the Lord your God is driving them out before you. That's a big problem, isn't it? Now we have these wise men, all this time later, who are coming to find Jesus using a star that they found in the sky. Astrology is certainly included in the category of divination. And so it's a bit difficult to make sense how these wise men used astrology to find Jesus. I think what is clear here is that the wise men were foreigners. They were Gentiles. That means they're not of the Jewish people. They followed a pagan religion. And yet, they came to Jerusalem searching for the King of the Jews. And as they were searching, God, in his infinite wisdom and grace, allowed them to find the Messiah. This takes us back, I think, to part of last week's sermon. Part of Simeon's prophecy was that Jesus would be a light to the Gentiles. These wise men from the east were, I think, the first fulfillment of that prophecy. And at the same time, their desire to worship Jesus stands in an ironic contrast to the people and the king of Jerusalem. The people in Israel where Jesus was born, where he's supposed to be the Messiah. If we move on to Matthew chapter 2, verses 3 to 8, it says, when Herod the king heard this, he was troubled. This word troubled, it means to be stirred up, to be alarmed and afraid of something. And all Jerusalem with him. And assembling all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. Isn't that interesting? He's getting all the scribes and the chief priests together to find out where the Messiah was supposed to be born. And this is just after these wise men came from another foreign country following a star, apparently knowing where he's going to be born. And they told him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for so it is written by the prophet, and you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. So then Herod goes on. He summoned the wise men secretly and ascertained from them what time the star had appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word that I too may come and worship him. Verse 3 says that the king and the people were troubled. They were alarmed, even frightened at the thought that these people from foreign lands were coming to find the Messiah. The last prophecy that they had had before this had come many, many years earlier. And yet now these people are showing up in their city looking for the Messiah. This is especially a problem for Herod, who, if you read a little bit of history, he had already spent a lot of effort securing his rule over Judea. He was able to get this position because his father was good friends with Augustus. And he had actually even gone so far as killing off other people who had potential claims to the throne there. So this is Herod's character. He spent a whole lot of effort and done a whole lot of terrible things even to make sure that he can remain the king of this place. And now in come these foreign magicians saying, where's the king of the Jews? Talking to the king of Israel or Judea and saying, hey, where's the king of the Jews? So Herod gathers everyone together who might have knowledge of prophecy to find out where the Messiah is supposed to be born. They quote Micah 5:2 because it gives a very clear and easy answer: Bethlehem. And now Bethlehem is not just a random city, it was the birthplace and the ancestral home of King David. So if you think about that from Herod's perspective, a child whom people are claiming to be the Christ, who they're claiming is a descendant of David, who's even born in the ancestral home of that ancient king, this could be a major problem for him. Politically, a big problem. Because he'd been appointed king of the Jews by Rome and had no other claim to the throne. It wouldn't take a whole lot of imagination to think that, well, people are going to put their support behind this other child who's been born in this place. So with this in mind, it would be very suspicious, I think, to us that Herod would actually want to worship this child who is being called the King of the Jews. And so he sends the wise men to Bethlehem. Interestingly enough, he finds out from them when the star appeared so he can figure out when the Messiah was supposed to have been born. And he hides his real intention, which is to eliminate any potential challenger to his throne. So you see, there's this huge contrast between the way Herod and the people of Jerusalem respond to the coming of Christ, as opposed to these strange foreign astrologers who came looking for Christ. So let's continue the story. Matthew chapter 2, verses 9 through 12. After listening to the king, they went on their way. And behold, the star that they had seen when it rose went before them until it came to rest over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. And going into the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother. And they fell down and worshipped him. Then opening their treasures, they offered him gifts, gold and frankincense and myrrh. And being warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed to their own country by another way. So somehow, this star appeared again and led them and stopped above the place where Jesus was saying. Well, we read this story today and we're like, that's not what stars do. It can be a little bit confusing for us. But, well, I don't think it's particularly helpful for us to try to figure out exactly what was going on there. There's a lot of different theories. One of the theories, I read one commentator who thought that it might have actually been a comet, because, comets can sort of appear and then move across the sky. But that still leaves a very great difficulty. How did it stop above a place and shine a light on it? Don't quite know what's going on there. I think the only conclusion that we can come to is that God used a miraculous sign that he knew these men would follow to lead them to his Christ. And it reminds us, I think, that just when we think we've got God all figured out, he shows us that we don't. He shows us that he's free, and he can lead people to himself however he likes. And so that's what he's done. And so the wise men come to him, and the text says that they fall down before him. They worship him. They give him gifts. Not just any gifts, but the best gifts that they had. Gold and frankincense and myrrh, which were all very, very costly things. And again, this is in contrast to King Herod. Herod, on the other hand, when they left and found another way home, his reaction was fury. He was furious because he could not find Jesus. Isn't that ironic? That God went through all of this trouble to lead these foreigners to Christ. And the people of, like Herod, the king of the city, God thwarted all of his attempts to find Christ. So the wise men worshipped him. Herod was left in fury. he could not find Jesus. So that when Messiah was born, he was recognized by pagan astrologers from the east instead of his own people. And not only that, these wise men, they worship him, they fall down, they offer him their greatest gifts. And this is in part a fulfillment of Isaiah chapter 60, in which it's prophesied that the nations would bring their wealth to Israel while praising the Lord. And then in contrast to that, Herod, as if we went ahead and read the rest of the text, we'd find out that his solution to this problem was to order the death of all boys under 2 years old in Bethlehem. So instead of coming to worship the Messiah, he tried to kill anyone who could potentially be the Messiah. He's recognized by pagan astrologers from the east instead of his own people. The wise men came looking for the Messiah after he was born, but the king of Judea, the chief priests, the scribes, the citizens of Jerusalem were all caught by surprise. These wise men met him with rejoicing, with worship, and with royal gifts. King Herod flew into a murderous rage. And so essentially what we have, the whole, if you can distill this story down to a kernel, what we have is that Jesus was not glorified by those who should have glorified him, but by those whom no one even expected to glorify him. And this would turn out to be a pattern of Jesus' ministry. If you look at the rest of the Gospels, who is it that comes to Jesus? It's the sinners, the tax collectors, the prostitutes, the people that were outwardly sinful, that everybody else looked at them and said, they're definitely not in God's kingdom. They're definitely not coming in. And yet they were the ones who were coming to Jesus. And then look at who was not coming to Jesus: the religious elite, the Pharisees, the scribes, the priests. The king was against him. This was a pattern of Jesus' ministry. Now, when we read a text like this, and I say this a lot, but we are often tempted to identify ourselves with the heroes of the text and not with the people who are messing things up. We look at this and we think, oh, yeah, I'm going to identify myself with the wise men and not with the king. And yet, I think we have to question that if Jesus came among us today, to our church, to the other churches in this area, what would he say to us? Would we accept him? Would we cling to him? Would we move towards him? Or would we be suspicious? Would we hold back? Would the way that we practice our faith, would it be glorifying to Jesus if he came and he looked at us as we are today? If Jesus came today, would those who are supposed to glorify him glorify him? Or would it again be those whom we least expect? I think there is so much beauty in this story. One of the wonderful things that it teaches us is that the good news of Jesus is for everyone. These wise men who came from the east, they were not Jews, they were pagans, they were astrologers. They were doing a lot of things that are prohibited by the law of God. And yet, when they searched for Jesus, God brought them to him. So what it teaches us is that when you come to Christ, when you come to Jesus, there's no criteria in the beginning. What I mean is you don't have to fit into a particular mold. There were, I mean, you've probably all heard the stories of the people who, well, okay, this has actually happened to me before. When I walked up to someone and I was talking to them and I told them that I was a pastor, and he immediately puts out a cigarette. Like, come on, it doesn't matter, really. We don't have to fit into a mold. We don't have to look good or be righteous when we come to Jesus. You don't get right before you become a Christian. You trust in Jesus, and then He changes you. You don't need to have Christian parents in order to come to Jesus. You don't have to stop sinning before you come to Jesus. All that matters, just like in this story, is how you respond to Jesus when you meet Him. The wise men worshipped Christ the King, while the fools clinged to their own thrones. There's no criteria. You can come to Christ, and He will take you in. Now, verse 11 also tells us that the wise men worshiped Jesus by falling down before Him and by offering Him gold and frankincense and myrrh. In other words, they showed their submission to Christ, and then they offered Him the best gifts that they could bring. And I think that there's an application in this for us today as well. Because the way that we worship Christ, I think the primary way that we worship Christ is by submitting to Him, by humbling ourselves before Him, by giving ourselves freely to Him. Romans 12:1 says, "Present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship." Being a living sacrifice, what it means is that I give up my goals. I give up my dreams. I give up the things that I want to do and I want to hold on to. I leave my throne behind. And instead, I do just like the Old Testament tells us, like God in the Old Testament. I love Him with my whole heart, with my whole soul, and with all of my strength. And I worship Him, not just, I mean, we come to church and we sing songs to God, and that's wonderful. That's a very, very important part of our worship. But it's not the total of our worship. Our worship should be in complete submission. It should be submitting ourselves to Christ every day. More and more areas of ourselves, we give them up to Him. We say, instead of doing my will, instead of doing what my flesh desires, I'm going to do God's will. I'm going to do what His Spirit is telling me to do. Practically, how do we do that? Well, the application of 90% of all the sermons in the world is read your Bible and pray. There's a reason that that's the application of 90% of the sermons in the world. It's that's how we mature in Christ. That's how we submit to Him and how we draw closer to Him. We fill ourselves with His Word until it's pouring out of us all the time. I'm not sure if any of you have ever done this, but if you've gotten on Netflix or something like that, and you have binge-watched a whole season of a TV show, then what happens? You fall asleep that night and you dream about it. You wake up the next day and it's still churning through your brain. Well, don't do that with Netflix. Do that with the Bible. Binge read the Bible. Fill yourself with it so that when you fall asleep, you're dreaming about it. So that when you walk around, you're talking to people about it. So that you're continuously thinking about it all day long. And that is going to help you submit to Christ more and more as you live each day. So the greatest gift we can give to Christ is our full submission. Worshiping Christ by submitting to Him. And as we do that, even though we can come to Jesus from any background, we cannot remain in our old ways of living. See, Christ changes us. His Word, as we dig into it and we fill ourselves with it, His Word and His Spirit together inside of us changes us and makes us more and more into the people that He wants us to be. More and more into the image of Christ. if we're wise, we will worship Jesus by offering him the best gifts that we can. We'll worship him by submitting to him, by knowing that and understanding that nothing we have compares to having Jesus. And so when we understand that, when that truth is sunk in, when we believe that, we're able to offer everything before him. When the value of Christ is above the value of your gold, when the value of Christ is above your frankincense and your myrrh, then you can offer it all to him, all of our heart, all of our mind, all of our strength. That's what happens when we truly search for Christ and we truly fall down and worship him as our King.